Troy hated dressing up for anything. Hell, clothes themselves felt like a waste of time half the time. He could very easily do his job in nothing but his coat, a shirt under it, and a pair of jeans. But often going undercover or going to a high-end place like this required him to try and dress more presentable than that. It was a nuisance. He hated wearing undershirts. He hated wearing sports coats, too. What was even the purpose of such attire other than to be uncomfortable? He walked into the restaurant as a soft-core piano was playing from the performance stage. The restaurant had 2 levels to it, the lower floor where a large music stage sat in the center of the building and a band played, and up above was the lounge with windows and every wall to look out at the lit city around them, and an overview of the ground floor below. It wasn't his favorite place to eat, but that made it ideal for situations like this where he was being tailed. Anyone who knew him knew that he wouldn't want to come here on an average day. "May I help you, sir?" the host asked. He was eyeing Troy up and down, judging him in his attire, making him adjust his shabby hat onto his head to hide his gaze. "Yes, I think someone is already here waiting on me. One Elizabeth Frost." "Ah, you're Jason Baker." Jason Baker was an alias that Troy used when he didn't want to be found, so it was reasonable that Frost would use that name. "Yes, sir." "Right this way, sir." The young host walked Troy up the stairs that led to the balcony. As he made his way up, he caught the eye of several diners who were giving him disapproving looks, leading further credence to his thoughts on dressing up. No matter what clothes you put on, you are what you are. You can groom and clean it, but a dog raised in the gutter will live and appear as a dog from the gutter. A man off the streets can be cleaned and dressed to look like a gentleman, but will always give the air of a street rat. That's the nature of the world. Fate deals you a hand and the world recognizes it.
"Well, you clean up real nice."
Troy turned his attention to the table he'd been taken to, and his eyes widened. There she sat, in all her glory. Frost had dressed to perfection with a strapless evening gown and light makeup on her face. Her hair was styled, and her luminous blue eyes seemed to reflect the candlelight at their table. Her dainty hands were resting on the table, and her soft lips were spread in a friendly, welcoming grin. Maybe there was a slight flaw in Troy's theory. Maybe Frost was that one exception. He knew where she was from and what she'd grown up to. But looking at her now, she might very well have been a princess. "Glad you could make it," he whispered, sitting down.
"I know this place is uncomfortable for you, so I took the liberty of ordering already. My treat tonight," she winked.
"You're a lifesaver," Troy grumbled, leaning forward, adjusting his collar.
"So what's the news?" Frost asked. "You sounded so urgent when you told me you wanted to meet me here. What'd you find out?"
Troy glanced around him quickly. None of the guests were looking in their direction, no obvious eyes and ears to overhear him. He leaned forward and tried to play his role, the loving date or fiancé. As long as everyone looked at them whispering and thought they were just a couple in love, no one would guess the reason they were really meeting. The old man got that document translated, and it's big, Frost. Bigger than anything I was expecting, he whispered. He reached over and held her hand, stroking the top of it with his thumb, trying to smile at her. "Keep playing the part, Troy. Keep playing it," he told himself. Frost smiled back, but she couldn't erase the sensation of fear in her eyes.
"You're scaring me, James. Tell me, what's in the document?"
There was a long pause between the two before Troy spoke again, and he knew this would be hard to stomach. "It's a preemptive strike," he whispered. "The U-boats have been coming in and out of that harbor for the last 2 months, carrying chemical gas, a type of Zyklon B agent used by the Nazis. It's distributed in pellets that, when exposed to oxygen, break and turn into gas when inhaled. And when it is inhaled, it's incredibly deadly."
"Gas?" Elizabeth whispered. "A bioweapon?"
"Not just one. Multiple. They've been dropping off canisters of the stuff and leaving them in key locations all around the city in highly populated areas, waiting for word from the Fuhrer to release the contents. According to what was translated, this would have continued for months, transporting more and more of the canisters to parts of the United States and high-population cities and meeting places. And then they would use that as a means of coercion." As he spoke, Frost's smile faded and her face went slightly pale.
"But why?" she asked.
"To keep America out of the war. If America gets directly involved, the gas will be released, killing thousands, possibly millions of Americans. It's a way to encourage us to stay out of it."
"Then we need to get those canisters right now." "And look, the documents didn't give specifics on where the canisters were placed," Troy interrupted.
silencing Frost, who was getting more and more unnerved. And frankly, it's not likely we'll find out by searching on our own. We need more leads, another clue, something to go on. He stopped speaking as the band below had stopped playing and were now switching up to a new song. One fellow was pulling out a saxophone, and the two would have to wait for him to start playing before they dared to talk again. This gave Frost a few moments to compose herself again. After calming down and letting the saxophone begin its melodies alongside a clarinet and piano ensemble, Frost spoke again, leaning forward and frowning seriously.
James, this is now officially too big for us.
You're right, it is, he answered with a knowing grunt. But this also isn't something I can drop either. We're being followed, Frost, which means that either the Nazis or someone sympathetic to them knows what we know. Even if I turn over everything to the authorities, it's not like we'll be spared. Besides, I don't even know if the police are the right people to go to at this point. There are eyes everywhere and ears to the ground. We're bugs under a magnifying glass, Frost.
That's a very unflattering analogy, Frost giggled.
Fine, you're a butterfly, does that help? James chuckled, appreciating Frost's humor. Before he could say anything more, food was brought before them. At Frost's place was a salad, while in front of him was a brisket that smelled mouth-watering. Not wasting time to dig in, Elizabeth picked at her salad, giggling at James's apparent hunger.
You didn't eat much today, did you?
After learning what I did, my appetite all but left me, Troy admitted. But, more importantly, we need to think of next steps. I can't go to the police with just the document. It's not enough without proving where it came from and authenticating it.
What about the photos of the U-boat?
I can use those too. But it'd be better if we could show the U-boat itself to the feds, Troy concluded. Considering that we killed a large portion of their crew, there's a chance it might not have left port yet. Yeah, I'll check that out myself tonight after.
Not on your life, Frost interjected. First thing you're doing is you're going right back to my apartment and getting a nap in.
Elizabeth, I'll sleep later.
Don't argue with me, Frost snapped, gripping his hand. You're exhausted, Troy. I know you too well to think you'd take care of yourself in a time like this, so I'm going to do it for you, even if it kills me.
Troy stared at her for a long moment, his fatigue slowly becoming more apparent as he felt Frost holding his hand. He frowned at her and leaned across the table so their faces were closer. You're the reason I can't take care of myself right now. Every minute I don't get this taken care of is another minute you're in danger, he whispered. In all honesty, I'd feel a lot better if you left town for a few days until this sorts itself out. I'd take care of your apartment for you.
After seeing the way you take care of your apartment? I don't think so, she laughed.
Troy squeezed her hand fiercely. Frost. Elizabeth, I'm not joking. I can't be sure how this will end. And I need to be on my A game. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you, Elizabeth. I can barely take care of myself, let alone both of us, Troy urged.
And you think I can't take care of myself?
Take care of yourself? Yes. Fight a war? No, Troy corrected. Elizabeth, this is war.
I know that, Elizabeth replied.
You're not listening to me, James. I can't lose you to this. You understand me? James hissed, his hand feeling Frost's fingers. I've done this job a long time, Elizabeth. I dedicated myself to this fight, and if I die doing it, then that's what I signed up for. But you... I promised the old man I wouldn't let anything happen to you. Frost smiled, beaming at him, which shone brighter than any candle-lit room could.
What a sweet promise to that old coot. But now it's my turn to make a promise, she whispered. I promise you that I'm seeing you through this. You might be too stubborn to back down, and you might be too pig-headed to let me help you, so I'm not going to ask your permission. I'm going to do what I want.
You always do, don't you? Troy asked. But Frost, I can't make you any promises like that. Troy looked around again to make sure he couldn't be heard and then whispered just softly enough for her to hear. I don't know if I can get out of this one in one piece.
Then I'll drag every piece of you out that I can and stitch you back together if I have to, Frost answered. I'm in this with you, for better or worse.
Troy started to argue, but then realized it was likely useless and just shook his head. Nothing I say will change your mind about this.
Nothing, Frost assured him. You're stuck with me, tough guy.
She grinned.
Tomorrow, while you run this evidence to the feds, I'll drop by your apartment and pick up your photos. Then I'll do some snooping of my own, all right?
One more question, Elizabeth, Troy whispered, the words of the old man coming back to him. Do you ever think of settling down? Retiring? Or who you'd want to settle down with? Frost's eyes fluttered and she suddenly gave a gentle grin. Without warning, and certainly without permission, she leaned across the table and planted a peck on Troy's cheek.
I've thought about it, but the person I have in mind is such a stubborn ass, I don't know if he'd ever reciprocate.
She then stood up.
I have to use the restroom. I'll be right back.
As she walked away, her hips swayed like a snake swaying to a flute player. Troy touched his cheek and winced at the revelation she planted on his heart. Maybe that stubborn ass is scared to reciprocate because he made too many mistakes to deserve you, he whispered. Damn it, Troy. You're a damned fool.